Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, August 24th, time for the AM edition of C2-A-Days from Campus to Canton. Please, if you would, give us a like on this video, subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube page. We would very much appreciate it. Our time with our twice daily updates is drawing to a close nearly. Tomorrow will be the final two editions of C2-A-Days, but still there is a little bit of news rolling in. As we speak sometimes, and that definitely happened for us last night when we were mentioning one running back injury at Georgia. Unfortunately, news popped up of another, Dajan Edwards, dealing with an MCL injury, as was reported by Graham Coffey of DogCentral.com last night, basically as we were discussing the C2-A-Days roundup yesterday evening. So Edwards, as we've said a few times, had been practicing with the number one offense, seemed to be in line to be the primary ball carrier for the Bulldogs, at least early on in the season, as Kendall Milton seemingly is still limited with a hamstring injury. But MCL sprains are certainly no small thing. Typically will linger for a bit. So wouldn't expect Edwards to be available in week one. Milton sounding more and more like perhaps he will not be available in week one. Branson Robinson, of course, as we mentioned, is going to miss the entirety of the 2023 season. That leaves Andrew Paul, Cash Jones, and Roderick Robinson as the top candidates right now for Georgia in week one. Of course, the Bulldogs, two-time defending national champion, open with UT Martin, not expected to be in any real danger, but that running back situation, and we've mentioned some defensive injuries as well that have piled up for Georgia in the opening weeks of fall camp. It's something to be aware of. Depth is a little bit of a concern already. This roster as a whole, entering the season at least, seems like maybe doesn't have quite the level of depth as the last year or two. And Georgia's is mostly everyone's number one ranked team in our team strength ratings, CFP Winning Edge. They're actually barely number two, just slightly behind Ohio State. But, do need to make probably some adjustments at the running back position leading up to the season, and their team strength rating is going to fall just a little bit more. So something certainly to be aware of as we get closer to the season kicking off. And then, of course, once it really gets going in earnest and once Georgia starts to look ahead to conference play. A couple of other quick notes in the SEC. Wilson Alexander of NOLA.com reported last night as well, not long after we got off of the evening edition of C2-A-Days, that LSU star defensive tackle Mason Smith will not be available for the week one clash against Florida State. Smith is a player we've mentioned a time or two. He went down with an injury midway through fall camp and was working his way back to full strength. However, as Alexander tweeted last night, this apparently is an NCAA suspension that is going to cost him the first game of the season due to reportedly an improper benefit. However, it does look like Smith will be back. So weren't 100% sure if Smith was going to be 100% healthy for that game against Florida State, but we now know that he will not be available due to another reason, not just his health. At South Carolina, didn't have any, real specific updates on the offensive side of the ball. We mentioned Antoine Wells and Trey Knox and Nick Harbor recently. All are expecting to play, have told head coach Shane Beamer, according to multiple reports that we've mentioned before, that they expect to play. A quick note on the defensive side for the Gamecocks as well. There is an incoming transfer, Drew Tuazama, who recently, as in a week or so ago, arrived from UAB. He is expected to play, according to reports coming out of Columbia, and also Jetius, and my apologies if I am messing up that pronunciation. Gear, also a transfer from Syracuse, who was impressive in spurts for the Orange last year. Was expected to, if not start, be a major contributor as an edge defender. He apparently has been banged up and may not be available in week 1. So something to keep an eye on there for the Gamecocks as they, of course, get ready to take on North Carolina in week 1. One final update before we get to the USC depth chart, which was released last night. Andy Bitter of Tech Sideline mentioned that tight end Nick Gallo, returning starter for the Hokies, apparently suffered an injury on Wednesday, and we're going to have to see. They're evaluating it to see how serious it is, according to head coach Brent Fry. Also, a couple of other players mentioned by Bitter via Pry, defensive tackle Gunnar Givens and running back Jeremiah Coney are going to miss, looks like, at least the first couple of games due to some surgeries that they are recovering from. So the doing it a little bit in reverse today than what we have been in the past, but probably the biggest news item of sorts came somewhat unexpected because USC, it seemed like perhaps, especially since it wasn't part of their game notes that were released earlier in the week, weren't sure we were going to get an unofficial depth chart from the Trojans ahead of week 0 and their matchup against San Jose State. And there weren't too many surprises. There were a couple of items that me personally and a couple of other folks that I communicate with, including our CFF team at Campus to Canton in the Slack, a little bit skeptical at one wide receiver spot to not be or to give you sort of the highlights. Dorian Singer, the transfer from Arizona, was listed as one of the wide receiver starters. Mario Williams was listed as a wide receiver starter as well. There is no differentiation on the depth chart, X, Y, Z, H, slot, not, whatever, position designation, but just 3 different wide receiver sets and a starter in Williams and Singer. But then an or at the 3rd starter with Kyron Hudson actually listed ahead of Brendan Rice. And we've talked plenty, trying to decide how much an or matters and in what order does it actually matter if Hudson's over Rice. And, I'm personally, from a fantasy perspective, pretty heavily invested in Brendan Rice. Wasn't necessarily a high pick, but tried to pick him up in the middle to late rounds of best balls and other opportunities that I've had throughout the course of the offseason. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to see that he is not a clear-cut number 1, at least according to this document, but that Kyron Hudson, who quite honestly was someone that I didn't really factor in. Hudson played 20% of snaps last year, has 15 career appearances under his belt. I actually did not have him listed in the 2 deep in the depth chart projections in our team profile. So perhaps an oversight on my part, but honestly, haven't read very much about him. We've seen some notes on Rice. We've seen some things about Mario Williams. We've mentioned Zachariah Branch, the true freshman, a few times, some other true freshmen as well, Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon, both who are on these depth charts. Deuce Robinson as well. But hey, Kyron Hudson is in the mix as a co-starter for the Trojans. Also, maybe a slight surprise ahead of Taj Washington, who is a returning starter. So by the way that we calculate it, if a player was first on the field for the first snap in 50% plus 1 of the team's games in the previous season, they are considered a starter. Some people meet that threshold and lose their job, by the end of the season, maybe started the first, 6 or 7, something like that, and then lose their spot. So it doesn't necessarily mean if you're a, quote unquote returning starter that we just pencil you in at the top of the depth chart. In fact, Washington had been a second teamer, still is in our projected depth charts. But worth noting that he is, Taj Washington behind Mario Williams in that one particular wide receiver spot, ahead of Zachariah Branch and Raleek Brown. But I fully expect that this wide receiver group and even the guys who are third and fourth on the list are going to see snaps. I feel like there's a pretty good chance that a lot of USC receivers are going to be mixing in and out, especially early on in the season, until maybe a 3 to 5 really emerge as kind of the go-to main contributors. I would expect, especially in week 0, that a lot of these guys are going to see playing time. And so it might limit the upside of guys like Mario Williams, maybe Darian Singer as well, who, are starters. They might actually see a few fewer snaps in week 0 than we might expect a little later. But it seems pretty clear to me, or I guess not clear, trying to figure out my own sort of opinion on the situation, how I anticipate it going. It seems very likely that USC is going to play quite a lot of these wide receivers in week 0. And I think, quite honestly, the same could be said for the running back position. Marshawn Lloyd transferred from South Carolina. A lot of people have been really excited for him for a couple of years. Of course, he got injured his true freshman year. Last season was limited to 35 snaps per game. Started 8, but has moved on to USC, and most projections, most folks in the CFF community just kind of automatically slotted him in as the top running back for USC, and that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. In the depth chart projection, it is a split between Marshawn Lloyd and Austin Jones, with Jones actually listed first. Earlier this week, so I did have Lloyd listed as the number 1 running back in our projected depth chart for the Trojans for the vast majority of the offseason, but had been reading a little bit of USC, news, practice reports, projections, depth chart analysis from team sites and things like that. USCfootball.com, one of them that does a great job. The 247 site, of course. And it just really started to sound like, really started to get the feeling that Austin Jones was going to be the first guy on the field. Similar to my thoughts on the wide receiver situation, I expect it's going to be pretty close to an even split between Jones and Lloyd. Darwin Barlow, Quentin Joyner are third and fourth on this projected depth chart, or should I say, officially released depth chart. But we shall see. But it wasn't. Perhaps we were all a little too quick to assume that Marshawn Lloyd was just going to step in and be the primary running back for USC. He, of course, may emerge as that, but Jones, as of right now, is very, very much in the mix, and in fact, listed as number 1 on the depth chart. So sometimes when we look at these, we try to, how real is this, or for the Rice situation with Rice versus Hudson at wide receiver, it was like, well, that's alphabetically, right? That's listed Hudson, then Rice. And I do that plenty. Try to look at other situations where we may see an or and wonder, who's listed. Are they all in alphabetical order? And on this USC depth chart, they're not all alphabetically ordered. There is an or at the left guard where Emmanuel Pregnon, the transfer from Wyoming, is listed as an or, with freshman Alani Noah. That is, flopped. At the nose tackle on the defensive side of the ball, Kion Bars is listed ahead of Bear Alexander, but there's an or there. Dejon Benton also is a three-way or at nose tackle, so not alphabetical there. And then at free safety, Max Williams is or with Bryson Shaw. So I don't know that means that Hudson is going to be first on the field, but that Rice will be in the second play. I don't know that it means Rice, won't end up as the starter. But it's just, and we're less than 3 days now from kickoff from this game actually taking place. We still have to, or do, maybe not have to, but we still try to parse any little nugget of information that we can find. And USC being, I believe, the last or second to last of the week 0 teams to officially release one of these depth charts, gives us something to talk about, gives us something to worry about as we're preparing lineups for CFS or DFS, things like that. But regardless, I would expect that USC, who is a 30-point favorite over what could be a very tough San Jose State team, but USC, a Pac-12 title contender and playoff contender, expect that they're going to have an opportunity, whether just by design early on, get a lot of these talented players in the mix and get them snaps, or because the way the game is likely to play out, USC winning by multiple touchdowns, 3 or 4 touchdowns, that we're probably going to have just as many questions entering week 2 or week 1 than we do ahead of week 0. So that is going to wrap it up for us this morning. Relatively short show. We will, of course, be tuned in and gathering notes and reports and information as we can throughout the day today. We'll be back this evening for the Thursday PM edition of C2-A-Days. Again, I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of Campus to Canton. If you've enjoyed these videos, please give us a like and subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube page. If, even if we are nearing the end of our time for C2-A-Days, Campus to Canton, of course, is churning out content daily on YouTube and other outlets, and every like and subscribe and tell somebody about us, it really does help. So we appreciate it. Hope everyone has a wonderful Thursday, and we'll see you this evening for another edition of C2-A-Days.